I first met Carol Costello in 1996 at WJLA-TV, the ABC affiliate in Washington, D.C. I was hired to produce the weekend shows, and Carol was one of the anchors. It was completely intimidating to work in major market television, as I was still very green in the business. I had to learn Washington, D.C. very quickly, and on weekends, we were very short-staffed. I had no idea what to expect from my anchor team, but I can tell you I was lucky to be working with Carol. Carol was and continues to be a team player. She never once came in and made a beeline for her office, as many anchors do in this business. Instead, she would come straight to the newsroom and want to work with me on the show. We would talk about the show, the lead, and what the reporters were working on. I learned quickly that Carol had solid news judgment, and that I had a lot to learn from her. If there was something that she disagreed with, she would always say, "Indira? No, wait. Indira, babe, let's talk about this lead." From that moment on, she was not just an anchor, but also someone who wanted to see me grow. For those of you who have or are taking the beat reporting class, you have heard me discuss the basics of broadcast writing. At one point, I have used the example, pretend that you are talking to your mother, or pretend you are talking to your best friend, because that's what the copy should sound like. That all comes from Carol, as she has taught me that strong writing makes any newscast shine. I have invited Carol here today, not just because she is a great colleague, but to talk about women in television news. According to a recent survey by the Radio and Television News Directors Association, there have been no significant changes in women in TV news in years. The most recent figures represent more of the same. Women have stayed at about 40% of the TV news force for almost a decade. They continue to make up 1/4 of the TV news directors, although 2007 had the second highest level ever, at 26.3%. It was just behind the record of 26.5% set in 2003. While this survey indicates no major changes for women in the news business, that has not stopped Carol from thriving in this business. Currently, she is a contributor to American Morning. Based in Washington, D.C., she has also contributed to other CNN shows, including The Situation Room and anchored CNN Daybreak, the network's former early morning news program. Carol covered the 2008 presidential election from all angles, as well as the shootings at Virginia Tech, Hurricane Katrina, the tsunami disaster in South Asia, the Russian school hostage crisis, and Hurricanes Charley, Francis, Ivan, and Jeanne. Carol has also interviewed Presidents Carter.
I've been wet.
Presidents Carter, Reagan, George H.W. Bush, and President Clinton, and has covered 4 presidential inaugurations. Prior to joining CNN, Carol has worked at local affiliates in D.C., Baltimore, Columbus, Ohio, and Akron, Ohio. She has won numerous awards, including an Emmy, a United Press International Award, and several Associated Press Awards. She earned her degree in journalism from Kent State University in Kent, Ohio. Carol's visit with us today is sponsored by the Department of Journalism and Mass Communications, with generous support from the Office of the Dean of the College, Hank Dobin, to whom we are most grateful. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me, Indira Samani, who I did not introduce to you, in welcoming CNN's Carol Costello.
Thank you, Indira, babe. Wow, I feel much more special than I really am after that introduction. Thank you so much, Indira, babe. I do remember those days, and they were crazy, and they were fun, and we made air by the seat of our pants many times, but we did it. We never did not do it, or we would have been fired. I do work for CNN, and I contribute to American Morning, which means I'm a correspondent, so I hope that you've all watched American Morning, and if you haven't, you're not watching the right network. So, CNN, American Morning, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern Time. We're on Monday through Friday, and it's a great show because we actually do news. We don't talk about stuff. Well, sometimes we do, but mostly we do hard news, which I enjoy. We were trying to come up with a topic for today's speech, and we came up with women in news because I cover a lot of women's issues for CNN. In fact, during the primaries in 2008, God, they seem to have gone on forever, right? I mean, they seem like such a long time ago, but they really weren't. It's bizarre. Anyway, I covered Hillary Clinton a lot, and I covered a lot of women's issues connected to Hillary Clinton, so I'll be mentioning her a lot in my speech. That's why you're going to hear her name. The title of my speech is Giving Into Sexism, the State of Women in Television News. So I want you to go back to the presidential election, the race for president and the primaries. I know it's hard, but you must do it because that's how I came up with this title, because the primary race for president brought to the surface every hang-up we have about white men, African Americans, and especially women. Well, especially African Americans too. You know, I mentioned the presidential race because of those hang-ups about women, specifically hang-ups women have about women. And I'll give you an example of that. Remember back in the primary when a well-dressed, educated woman stood up at a rally for John McCain and she said, "What do we have to do to beat the bitch?" Remember that? I mean, I was just shocked by it. That someone, because the woman knew a camera was on her. It was captured on camera, and it created this mini controversy, and much of it had to do with John McCain's chuckle after he heard the B word. I was fascinated at the thought a woman would actually stand up and casually call another woman a bitch. I wondered what she would call Barack Obama or John Edwards if she had a similar strong dislike of those two men. Would she blurt out the N-word, or would she call John Edwards a bastard on camera? Maybe she would, and like, oh my God, I'm sorry I mentioned Hillary Clinton. I think I'm pressing a button on this podium. Wait, I'm going to try to figure it out because I have a college education.
Oh my God. What happened here?
It says lights, camera.
Okay. Oh God. Bob, please come to the podium.
I told you we were a good team. Yeah, I'm going to move away from that. It's okay.
I'm sorry.
It made the speech much more interesting, actually. Anyway, the observation about that woman, along with many others, led me to the title of today's speech, Giving Into Sexism, the State of Women in Television News. I know, what does Hillary Clinton have to do with women in news? Well, pretty much everything. We work in a business that reflects our culture. What's happening out there winds up on television at 5, 6, and 11. My goal is to provoke a thoughtful discussion about where women are at a time in history where true equality is within our grasp. The good news, along with that first in presidential politics, there is another historic first for women in news. For the first time, we have a woman at the helm of a national news broadcast, Katie Couric. Just one, but we have one. It is gratifying to see a woman crack, if not break, the glass ceiling. And while I feel this is good news, I have a fear that women are slipping back because we're not fighting against sexism strenuously enough. So I ask you again to think about the answer to the question, are women giving into sexism? 40% of newsrooms are comprised of women. You heard Indira say that, and that's pretty good, 40%. But that percentage hasn't changed in 10 years. Only 25% of women are news directors, you know, who the people in charge of newsrooms. That number is the best ever. But when you have 40% of newsrooms filled with women, you have to wonder why there are so few news directors. Go up the ladder and you'll find only a small percentage of women vice presidents, general managers, and there are no women presidents of networks. And this is true even though women comprise more than half the population. Is it plain old-fashioned sexism perpetrated by powerful men? Or are we, as women, partly to blame? Are we as women partly to blame? Just a little bit. Remember the question I asked you to ponder, are we giving in to sexism? Now, to pry an answer out of you, I'd like to illustrate 3 conundrum women face in our culture. And since our business reflects our culture in the news business. The first, our image and how women derive their power. I was watching a national news broadcast the other day, and there were two anchors, a woman and a man, and they were sitting on chairs with a table in between them, which exposed their whole bodies. The man was wearing a dark suit with a red tie, and the woman was wearing a skirt so short she did not dare uncross her legs or turn her torso to address her male co-anchor. I found myself unable to pay attention to what she was talking about because I was mesmerized by her skirt. I really was. I couldn't take my eyes off it. I was expecting at any moment she would flash me, a la Britney Spears. Then she would really be famous, right? Today, days after I witnessed this skirt, I imagined she was talking about Hillary Clinton and the complaints about the mannish pantsuits the candidate wears to look strong. But honestly, I have no idea what that woman anchor was talking about, and isn't that what we, as journalists, are supposed to be about? Inviting our viewers to hear loud and clear what's going on in our world? Maybe I thought this woman's male boss told her to look sexy. Maybe. I'm not alone in marveling at what some anchors are wearing. Just a few weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal Online, a reporter, Randall Forsyth, was marveling too. He offered this as a reason why. The farther the stock market falls, the lower the necklines appear to be among female anchors and correspondents on financial cable news networks. Or maybe, he pondered, the ample display was meant to distract male viewers from the 300-point drop stocks, 300-point drop in the stock market. Again, were these women giving into sexism? As I've said, our business reflects our culture, and our culture seems to be saying sex is power, even in 2009. Women seem to be invisible unless they're not just attractive, but sexy. Even older women like me, who supposedly have gained intellect and experience, have to be sexy. We've suddenly become cougars on the prowl for sex with young men who want us not because we're intellectually stimulating, but because they find us You hate that word cougar, don't you? I hate that. It makes me crazy when someone says that. Have you ever seen that TV show on the Style Network called What Not to Wear? Yeah. Families nominate a much-admired beloved mother or daughter or sister for a fashion makeover. And Stacy and Clinton are the coaches, and they swoop in to tell this much-admired woman how incredibly hideous her clothes, hair, and makeup are. And then after totally trashing her, they transform her into a fashionable, sexy woman, and suddenly, in the words of Stephen Colbert, she's worthier. Many times, when the woman's family sees her in her new fashionable, ensemble, they'll cry at the new and improved version of their beloved, much-admired loved one. And I'm always baffled by this. Why are they crying? Are they saying, thank God that ugly, hideous person is gone? And, my loved one can now be admired because she's beautiful. You probably can't see this, but I love this. This was in the New York Times style section. This is a bride's back, and the headline is, "The bride wore very little," and she's wearing a very racy, low cut in the back wedding dress. The article says, brides now want to show their curves, baring their midsections, breasts, and lower back so they can be more vamp than virgin. They're willing to vamp in front of their mothers, fathers, and brothers, and I think the groom maybe, but he's never mentioned in the article, oddly enough. The brides say it's because they feel in control of their sexuality. Really? Or is it something else? Like our anchor in the short skirt, is it giving into sexism? Look, I know it's helpful to be attractive in the news business. I'm not going to stand up here and be a hypocrite because it is great to be attractive, to get a job in the news business, and beauty does draw viewers to us. But there's a big difference from deriving our power from our sexuality than in deriving our power from what, in the end, will keep viewers glued to us, our words. The second conundrum women face is staying in or getting off. I should say staying on or getting off the mommy track. That's the second conundrum women face, staying on or getting off the mommy track. I told you 25% of news directors are women, and there are very few vice presidents, on up. So let's examine whether that plays into our question today. Are we giving into sexism? And this is a really tough one, I know. It's tough to talk about. But I've talked with many executives, both male and female, who tell me the number one reason more women are not in top jobs is their desire to be more in control of their time to raise their children. Even when talented women are offered top jobs, many opt out because of family obligations. Again, our business reflects our culture. So I'd like to read you a quote given to Good Housekeeping magazine by Elizabeth Edwards. She was interviewed by the magazine while her husband was still in the race for the Democratic nominee, back during the primaries. Mrs. Edwards said, "Hillary Clinton and I come from the same generation. We both went to law school and married lawyers, but after that we made other choices. I think my choices have made me happier. I think I am more joyful than she is." Mrs. Edwards chose to stay home with her children. Mrs. Clinton did not. Edwards later apologized for that remark, but it came from somewhere inside her. Mrs. Edwards was not criticizing Mrs. Clinton's politics. She was criticizing her choices as a woman. We still feel an enormous amount of guilt when we're away from our children, even if we have a husband who volunteers to stay home with the kids. I'll make this a tad more provocative by asking you the question again, is this in part giving into sexism? When I talked to those high-powered TV executives, none of them mentioned men opting out of top jobs to raise their children. And I wondered why that was. Are women not willing to give up power at home, not willing to abdicate the power within the home to their husbands? Or do we really prefer to shoulder most of the responsibility? I mentor a lot of young women and a lot of young men at several universities, and they're all between the ages of 19 and 22 years old. And I'm always surprised when the young women in my group ask me if they can have their dream profession and raise healthy, well-adjusted children as well. They're often willing to give up their dream to raise children they don't even have yet. They never ask me if they'll be able to marry a man who will help them achieve their goals or to help them raise those children that they don't even have yet. It's like 2009. Where does this come from? I mean, is it uniformly in our nature as women to nurture, or are we, in subtle ways, giving into sexism? The third and final conundrum women face: competition. Not with men, but with women. In the world of news, professional women are often tempted not to support our female colleagues, and because let's face it, there are slots for women in TV news and there are slots for men. Rarely do women directly compete with men for on-air positions. And that presents a strange kind of sad dilemma for women colleagues. I mean, do you support that woman you're competing against? Or do you support her knowing down the line your support will help you gain power in the newsroom? An example. Don Imus, remember him? That seems 100 years ago too. Don Imus. When he uttered his nappy-headed hoe comment directed at the Rutgers women's basketball team, the African-American community stood up and collectively protested quite loudly. Black employees within NBC News collectively pushed their bosses to act, and they did. NBC fired Imus. But for years before that, Imus had made incredibly sexist comments. Among his targets, his own female colleagues. Contessa Brewer is an anchor at MSNBC, and she used to read the headlines on Don Imus's show. One day, Ms. Brewer said something Imus didn't like, and on the air he said of Brewer, and I quote, "That skank has to spend 3 hours with makeup in the morning. She's dumber than dirt. And oh my God, what a pig. She has a fat ass." Imus was able to keep his job after that one. NBC did issue a statement saying Imus went over the line and Ms. Brewer is a valued and respected employee. But again, this is in step with what's happening in our culture. I was struck by something an Ohio voter told me during the primary. She was referring to what was being said about Hillary Clinton. Clinton is a bitch, a witch, a cleaning lady, a nutcracker, a lesbian. Anyway, this Ohio voter, who is a woman, said, "Sexism of the nature Hillary Clinton is experiencing has been around as an acceptable joke for years. As far as racism, it's definitely not politically correct or acceptable." How many of us would be uncomfortable telling a racist joke to an African American? How many of us would be uncomfortable telling a dumb blonde joke to a woman? You know, I just ask you again, is this giving into sexism? You see, if we as women support and loudly defend one another, just think of the power we would wield. In conclusion, you know, I don't want you to think I don't love women, because I do. And Dear Babe's a good example of that. I think women are complicated, and I think they're brilliant, and I think there is nothing they can't do. But I do believe women have a higher bar to clear than men do to make it to the top. So I leave you with something Dee Dee Myers, President Bill Clinton's former press secretary, said of Hillary Clinton's run for president. Dee Dee Myers said, "I hope when this campaign is over, they will look back and have a long conversation about how we can eliminate the obstacles holding women back." Thanks for listening. And now I'd really like to open it up to questions, and hopefully I can walk around so I don't have to bend over like this anymore. But yeah, open it up to questions, that'd be cool. I can talk loud enough, actually.
Okay.
Oh, that's so much better.
Anybody? Questions? Okay, let's start over here. Alicia?
When your female mentees ask you about their imaginary children, what do you tell them?
I always ask them, does your mother work? And most of them say yes. And then I ask them, do you think your mother did a good job raising you? And most all of them say yes. And then I ask them, well, why don't you think you could raise a child and still have your dream? And they cannot answer the question. So, I mean, you would be better able to answer it than me. You know what I mean? Like, I would actually like to hear what you have to say about that. Do you find that in your generation?
We hear talk about it a lot, but I see no reason why I can't be you one day and have kids and a family and a perfectly healthy lifestyle. My kids will be healthy, and I'll do what I want to do too.
They're really...
I understand.
Go ahead.
I guess we came from a generation where a lot of moms are lawyers, dads are doctors, and kids think, oh, I never got to see my parents, and the parents are blamed for the dysfunction of the kid's life, and I don't think it has to be that way. And I know that those of us who come from supportive working parents believe you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, and it's, you know, and it's just a different generation, and I understand that, and this generation thinks so differently than mine did. The interesting thing, though, is when I mentor young men, they have none of those concerns. None of them want to get married. They're the same. So it just intrigues me that young women have changed from generation to generation, and it would be really interesting someday to sit down and really study why that is.
It's because young men in our generation don't think about it.
See, just like in my generation.
I'm not a college student. We're from the community, and I work for a living in journalism, and I don't really want to come home after working 10 hours a day and completely have to take on everything in a household. I mean, I think it's certain aspects of our culture still need to catch up with the women's movement. Not men, but just certain things about how our culture works and how it applies to families.
Definitely so. Definitely so.
Do you feel that you've reached a ceiling for yourself in the industry? Do you feel like if you wanted to, or I don't know if you do ever aspire to move on to any, I don't know.
To an executive? No,
executive
not me.
If you did, do you feel that you face those same difficulties, and how would you personally, I guess, handle that?
I never really wanted to become an executive, so that's a difficult question for me to answer. I would like to think that if I had chosen that path, that I would be as successful as I have been in the path that I chose, to be a national correspondent. From the male executives that I've talked with, and there's still a lot of sexism out there, don't get me wrong, there is. There's just this wall that many women hit for whatever. But I think that companies are actively looking for qualified women executives, and there aren't enough of them willing to give the time to really do the job effectively. And that could be smart of them. Like, the reason I gave this speech is I wanted to be provocative. Maybe that's not what women really want. maybe that's not a reason at all. I just like people to think about things. But I would like to think if I chose to be an executive, I could do, because I've always believed I could do whatever I wanted to.
Does the environment of, TV or just journalism in general, do you think there's some, institutional boundaries that women who may have children face? I know we've read about Elizabeth Vargas, who was, filling in where they made the replacement on NBC Nightly News.
Katie Couric has kids.
Yeah, well, Elizabeth was pregnant and had, a young child,
Right.
and she was forced to stay later and do things, and she didn't want to do that, but I don't know. Is there, are they flexible with women? Will they make allowances, or do you have to give your life first to TV?
If you want to be a reporter, it's pretty much a 24-hour job. I mean, it really is. I won't lie to you. I mean, I'm on call 24 hours a day. If there's a hurricane, I have to go. I can't say, well, I have to stay home and, but I have a supportive husband. My husband will say, you go, honey, you go, girl, I'll take care of things here. But that's what I wanted out of my life and my relationship. And some women may want different things. But yeah, you do make sacrifices. But then, we know a million women who have children in the news business, and they're just fine. There are certain jobs, like in local news, if you become the local anchor and you anchor the 5 and the 6, you're home by 6:30 or 7. And anchors don't go out, local anchors I should say, national anchors are a different thing, but local anchors don't go out and do much, which is actually, see, it's a double-edged sword though, because I think what's happening in local news, anchors don't do much at all anymore except read, right? And people have that perception of them, and that's a bad perception, because that's why a lot of people are opting not to watch local news. So it used to be the local anchor would go out to lunch in the middle of the shows with council people and the mayor and, and sources that they'd have in the community, and they added real value to the newscast. But it's not so much like that anymore. But the local news business is shooting itself in the foot because people see through that. I mean, you see through that on the air, don't you? You know when somebody knows what they're talking about and somebody doesn't. And don't you want your local anchor to know everything about the community in which you live? I do. I want him or her to know a lot more than I do. And I don't find that in many places. I've lived in a lot of places. I don't find that in many markets. So, it's all in what you choose to do. But in local news, you can find jobs that, you can go home with your kids. In national news, it's a lot harder because there's so much competition. And it's such, it's like a pressure cooker. You got to really want it. And you have to be really passionate about it because that is your life.
So, do you find that people you interview treat a male anchor different than a female anchor or interviewer?
You mean when?
If you're interviewing someone politically or you're in a panel discussion, is your opinion treated differently, do you find, as a woman?
Not the opinion, but I think that was really well illustrated during the primary when Katie Couric interviewed Sarah Palin. I mean, part of the reason the Republicans agreed to let Katie Couric interview Sarah Palin was because she was a woman. And Katie Couric has this, bubbly, perky persona, and she couldn't possibly ask any hard questions. So that was part of the reason. But I don't think people treat women and men differently in the field. I really don't. I think some news directors do, and I could tell you really horrible stories about that. But I also think that in many markets, women are the stars, and that's because of that 40% figure. Remember how many women now are in news. Men are we're bleeding men like crazy, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But I think women, it's within their grasp, but they just have to fight a little harder.
Are you able to say whether things might be any different in other countries, I think particularly in Europe?
In the world of news? Well, in Britain, it's pretty much the same as here, I would say. I don't know. That's a tough question because I don't know. I've interviewed reporters from Japan and Afghanistan, and they do have reporters there, believe it or not, you know, and the women there, of course, report at their own risk.
I think, for example, that they have, particularly on the continent, there are a number of laws that in which there is not only maternity leave but paternity leave. Those kinds of issues that might reduce some of the obstacles that you're talking about.
I don't know enough about that to really be able to answer that question, but I do know that the most successful women at the national level in the United States, they want to be at work, even if they have children. I mean, and we do have generous family leave time, but you know, it's never enough. You know, you have to go back to work at the time their baby becomes really enjoyable, and that's really difficult for a lot of women. Like, you know, for the first couple of months, the baby's sleeping, and that's about it.
You said there were on-camera roles for women, on-camera roles for men. There's not recognition. Do those roles just keep perpetuating the stereotype? Do you feel put in a hole just by being a woman?
When I see a woman dressed in a short skirt with a plunging neckline on another network or at local news, I do think that affects me, and it really pisses me off, frankly. Because, you know, you work so hard to be better and to prove yourself and to fight this stereotype that people have about attractive women in the news business. And then somebody appears like that, and then suddenly we're all put in this box. So, yeah. The better news is there are so many women in newsrooms now that a lot of local news are going to 2 women shows, 2 female anchor shows, which is kind of cool. And some have been successful and some have not. But there's really, I mean, if you're a man and you want to get into the field of broadcasting and television news, because there's such a shortage of them now. And that's not a good thing. It's not a good thing, because you want all perspectives sent out to your audience. And women and men think about things differently.
Is there a gender pattern in the assignments that men and women get as reporters, the stories they get to cover? Has that changed?
It depends on how strong the woman is. Like Christiane Amanpour, you just don't mess with her. If you say, hey, Christiane, you want to go do a story about a 100-year-old's birthday party? She would like pick you up and throw you across the room. But yes, women are still given the softer stories. We're given the emotional stories. If there's a story to be done about women's issues, the woman always does it. And, you know, it just depends on how much you want to fight it. If you fight it, they won't do it. But if you accept it, you'll get it every time.
We're seeing more print news journalists on camera and hearing their voices and so on, on the internet and so on, the sort of convergence of multimedia. What do you think it's hard to guess in 10 years, but will this change some of the problems you're talking about, which really come from that image, that unblinking eye of the TV camera on this female image? And if that breaks up with sort of journalists, coming into this from different doors.
Right. You know what I think is really happening? The news business is changing, and fewer people are watching television news. So when you want to sell a product, what do? You stick a really pretty woman in there, and you hope people watch. But what executives forget is that men, especially, watch for content. I mean, they might stop and say, oh my God, she's great, she's like, what a babe, but they're not going to stay and listen unless she has something to say. So I think that's part of what's happening in the news business right now, and that's why you're seeing so much of that now, sexy women on television. But the women with the most success and the #1 shows are Greta Van Susteren, Nancy Grace, Campbell Brown, and these women don't do that. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to think of a really gorgeous, sexified woman who has a #1 show out there, and I can't think of one. So, and then the other part of the problem is print journalism is sadly dying, which is not a good thing. So to promote themselves, they'll come on TV and they'll give away their stories. And so who are we to say, no, it's free for us? So that's why you're seeing that. Yeah, but I think that the news business is changing so fast, nobody knows where it's going. All we do know, young people, is that what I do now will soon become obsolete. I'm sure of that. It will all be on the internet. Or it'll be in a different form. It won't be what it is now. It's already moving so fast towards that we don't even know what to think anymore. Any other questions?
Do you think that Black women face great challenges being talented as a minority, both African American and
She's asking me if African American women face even bigger problems when it comes to sexism in the world of TV news, and yes, they do, because you're fighting two stereotypes, right? The good news is that networks are realizing the value of diversity now. They're saying to themselves, wow, they're like all different kinds of people can bring different perspectives to our news, and if we bring those perspectives to our product, then we'll have a whole new audience out there watching. And you know, when they put it into that context, and you know, because money is everything, you know, if you can attract a certain audience, they'll like, but yes, but I think that, I know at CNN, we have a great diversity program and like actively search for African Americans to be on the air. But I would say overall in the industry, it's still difficult. But, you know, it's so much better than it was 25 years ago when I mean, you know, at my first local station, just to give you a small example, I started in Akron, Ohio at TV 23, and this was in 1985. I was the first female anchor ever at the station. So we've come a long way very quickly, and that's a good thing. And that includes African Americans too, because I think we had one African American in the whole station at TV 23, and now their main anchor is African American.
I was wondering about your D.D. Myers quote at the very end about eliminating the obstacles holding them back. What's your opinion on the steps that we can take to eliminate those obstacles?
I think the biggest thing that women can do is support one another. I think if there's an injustice toward a woman at work or one of your female friends, it's important for you to stand up and support her. There isn't enough of that, and I don't really get why, but it's a whole cultural, I mean, I could go into that forever, but I think that's one of the most important things women can do, is support one another. And the other thing is not to accept any sexism directed at us. We don't have to. We're powerful. I think women don't realize how powerful we really are. We don't have to take that crap anymore. So those are the two most important things I think women can do to achieve full equality. Anyone else?
What advice do you have to aspiring female journalists to be successful?
Be really smart. Read all that you can. Know everything you can possibly know, so that when someone asks you a question, you can like answer it in an intelligent way, or at least you can fudge it intelligently. Because if you think about it, what has kept me in the news business for 25 years hasn't been my looks, because at the age of 47, it isn't about your looks anymore. It's about what you have up here. If I didn't have anything, I would have like burnt out when I was like 28, because there's a million pretty women behind me wanting my job. And you know how fashion changes with the wind. You go in, you go out. That's the best advice I could give you. The other bit of advice is to know how to do everything, because I really think the internet is the way to go. So you need to know how to write, because you know the internet is the great equalizer. If you're writing an article for CNN.com, you have to know how to write. You have to know how to tease the story in a headline to attract eyes to your site. I mean, the internet doesn't care what you look like. You know what I mean? So that's what I would say. Know as much as you can and be a creative, good, concise writer. Anyone else? Gosh, I thought you'd ask me about the Jon Stewart, Jim Cramer thing, which is fascinating. You'll buy. I'm dying to get home to watch Jon Stewart at 11 o'clock. I just think it's interesting that Jon Stewart has taken on an entire network. I mean, whether or not Jim Cramer is good or bad at his job is like not for me to say, really. But it's intriguing that it's bubbled over into this huge thing, and it's come to symbolize what's happening, you know, to Wall Street and the business world and what people understand or don't understand about what's happening to our economy. And I think by Jon Stewart having this argument with Jim Cramer, it just helps people understand better what's going on and who they should really listen to, and you know, what bits of information they should take and what bits they should throw away or be leery of. So I think it's a great thing, and it's entertaining too, so that makes it even better. And it's not my network, which makes it great. Anything else? Thank you so much. I appreciate it.